Hello and welcome to the Everything's Black Mike podcast with me, Aaron Stokes. We're here for the Monday show with a little bit of a twist. As you can see, if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook right now, there's no Andrew Musgrove this week, which means I am in the hosting chair and also doing a little bit of a solo episode for you guys where we look back at, unfortunately, a 2-1 defeat for Newcastle United in the FA Cup. It means they're out of the competition. Their hope of having 2 runs at silverware at Wembley this season is over. And plenty to dissect, a lot of it negative. We will, of course, as always, try and find the positives. As always, thank you for joining us on the podcast provider later on, or if you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube. This week, more than ever, it is more important that you get your comments in, and we'll dive into the comment section throughout this episode and have a little bit of a chat. We've also got some questions emailed in after yesterday's unfortunate defeat. And as always, before we get this episode underway, thank you as ever to our sponsors, NordVPN. You can jump in the description of this podcast and your provider and get your exclusive link to keep yourself and your family safe online. Well then, I've got a comment here that I'm just going to start with, and it's Andrew Gibson, who's just wrote on YouTube, "This is going to be depressing." Well, I tell you what, Andrew, I will try and make it as least or as less depressing as I can, but unfortunately we are going to have to talk about some negatives. And the main one, of course, is that Newcastle United are out the cup. It was a really good opportunity not only to win that game yesterday against the Brighton team, who have been a little bit up and down, but also to go really far in this competition, because as we've seen over the last couple of weeks and certainly over the weekend, there's some big teams missing from that pot, and now Newcastle are added to that list. You know, you've got no Arsenal, you've got no Liverpool, you've got no Chelsea, you've got none of these big teams really. And when you look at the draw of the teams that are left in, you would have been really confident that Newcastle could go on into the quarterfinals, into the semi-finals, and then into the final itself. That was certainly Eddie Howe's wish. And I think that was evident by the team that we saw he put out yesterday. He made 6 changes, Eddie Howe, from the defeat at Liverpool. But that team was a really, really strong one. Very, very strong midfield, arguably. And it's a question that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, is whether that is Eddie Howe's most informed midfield at present, the one he picked yesterday. We saw Isak coming back in. We saw a strong back line, and we saw a big change in goal. And I think that's where we should probably start with this episode. As we talk about the team selection, it was a big, big call from Eddie Howe to leave Martin Dubravka out against first Nottingham Forest and then at Liverpool. And as me and Andrew said on this podcast just a week ago, I think we were both in agreement that that was probably a decision that looked like a permanent one. We thought Nick Pope was going to come back in, and we didn't think he'd lose his spot in the team before that cup final. As it happens, Dubravka back in yesterday, and I think anybody who watched the game or has seen it after, who was there in person, will probably agree that Dubravka was probably Newcastle United's man of the match. He really did help keep the score down. He made some fantastic saves. He was very, very good on his with his distribution, with the ball at his feet, as we know he has been in the last couple of months, something that Nick Pope has been lacking. And I think it begs the question, which we'll talk about later on in a bit more detail, is he now back in to stay? And I would love to get your opinions on that in the comment section if you're watching this live. The other big cause was Harvey Barnes came in on the right. Anthony Gordon kept his place on the left. Joelinton, big boost to see him back in the middle. He played alongside Sandro Tonali and Lewis Miley. And as I've just touched on a couple of minutes ago, a lot's been made of Bruno's form. A lot has been made of whether he's playing his best football right now. A lot has been made about whether he is maybe in need of a little bit of a rest. He got a slight rest yesterday in the sense that he didn't start the game. He did come off the bench in the closing stages. I say the closing stages. I think he came on in about 57 minutes. So he got a good chunk of that game, including extra time. And I think few will argue that he probably wasn't at his best again yesterday. So is that midfield three of now Joelinton, Tonali and Miley maybe how they go at West Ham next week? Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. But all in all, I think it was a very, very strong team. And the strongest call of all was obviously starting Alexander Isak. He missed that defeat in midweek. Some will say, well, it was clearly tactical. Clearly there was no injury there. Or if it was very, very minor. Because Eddie Howe left him out at Liverpool. A lot of people said, is that a little bit of mind games? Is he just dropping Isak out the team? One, because he doesn't want to risk him, but two, just so Arne Slot and Liverpool's staff can't maybe get used to the game plan that Newcastle are going to use, because we saw Newcastle at Anfield play this ridiculous, I say ridiculous, but it was so unusual, this style, this system they played. They had Callum Wilson up top, you had Anthony Gordon really close to him in a central role. Then you had changes in the second half where William Asula and Harvey Barnes came on, and the system just looked all over the shop, players interchanging. But yesterday we saw back to basics. Alexander Isak leading the line, getting his goal, scoring the opening goal in the first half from the penalty spot. And he nearly had a second one a few minutes later as well when he scored a wonderful goal past Verbruggen, but unfortunately it was offside. And I think if that goal had went in, we would probably be sat here talking about a very, very different game indeed. Before we get on to Isak and the performance and how the game unfolded, we've got a few comments here from those watching along live. We've got Simon here watching on YouTube. Thank you for commenting, Simon. He says, I sat right behind the goal at Leicester and Dubravka was more vocal in his organisation of the defence. If you jump back a couple of years ago, he wasn't very good at communications. He is the number one for me. We also have Leslie Chu, who comments, agree, Dubravka should be our number one at this moment. He's proved his worth, resulting in a new contract. He deserves his minutes as well. We've also got Jay from the Tune, who says, I'm very happy for Dubravka, one of only a few who deserves applause, in my opinion. And we also have Darren Lee, who says, Dubravka was good yesterday. If it was Pope and goal, we would have lost by more than 2 goals. Thank you very much for those comments there about Dubravka. So as we said, Isak gets the game off on a good footing for Newcastle, who started really well, I thought. I think some people may disagree because of the way the game panned out and the result ultimately, but I thought Newcastle were good in that first half. They created openings. We will, of course, talk about Anthony Gordon later in the episode, as you can understand why. But I actually thought he was full of running in the first half. He was trying to make things happen. Jolinton played really well. He was picking his passes well. He doesn't look like he's really missed a beat despite missing the last 5 games. And Alexander Isak doing what he does best, scoring, being a nuisance, creating chances, finishing well, and really not showing any ill effects after missing that game on Merseyside just a couple of days prior. Newcastle got their goal in the 21st minute. Yankuba Minteh, who was making his first St James's Park appearance, he brings down Tino Livramento in the penalty area. Anthony Taylor wasted no time pointing to the spot. And what a penalty that was, by the way, by Alexander Isak. But unfortunately, Newcastle couldn't make that lead count, and Yankuba Minteh went up and redeemed himself at the other end with a well-taken goal, a good move by Brighton. But I think we can probably say that was Newcastle's defending at its sloppiest in the afternoon. I think Fabian Schär doesn't come out of it very well. Kieran Trippier tries to redeem and sort of not redeem himself, but block the shot, and it ultimately ends up going past Dubravka. But Yankuba Minteh, a very, very good move and sort of a surprisingly muted celebration from him, I thought, when he sort of put his hands above his head. Now, some people might say that he was maybe apologising to the Brighton fans for giving away that penalty, but others will say, well, he didn't even play a game for Newcastle and he sort of was refusing to celebrate. So I would love to get your thoughts on not only that, but how you thought he played on Sunday. And it's a really, really interesting one on Yankuba Minteh, isn't it? Because we probably won't know for a couple of years whether Newcastle United have done the right thing. I mean, the hands were tied last summer. We don't need to go over this old ground of, why they had to sell him. There was a particular taunt from the away fans yesterday that Yankuba Minteh left Newcastle for reasons that might have had something to do with how good Newcastle are. But we all know the truth, and that is Newcastle's hands were tied. They had to sell in late June, and they thought Minteh was probably along with Elliot Anderson, the best way to do that, raise funds, stave off any threat of a points deduction. But as I say, we probably won't know for a couple of years whether that was a good decision or a bad decision, but the early signs are he's 20 years old, he's a semi-regular player, quite a decent player in this Brighton team. Fabian Herzl, the manager, clearly rates him, clearly likes him. And I thought yesterday, apart from giving away the penalty, he was relatively impressive. Certainly in the first half before he came off shortly after the interval. So very, very interested to see what he does in the future, but also very interested to see what he was like at St James's Park. You've got Ghost in the Suzuki grass here saying Minteh was okay. Didn't think he was any better than that though, and he took his goal. His goal took a bit of reflection on its way in too. And unfortunately, whoever wrote that comment at the start that this would be a little bit of a depressing episode is probably going to have that comment validated now, because we've got to talk about the second half. And as I've just said, Newcastle, I thought, were quite good in the first half. They were quite solid. They created chances. They obviously could have went in at the break on another day, maybe a couple of goals ahead. But it was a familiar feeling in that second half of, okay, Newcastle United are struggling. They were sloppy. There was misplaced passes. There was hesitation at the back. They weren't creating chances. They weren't fluent in their attacking. And for anyone who was at the game yesterday, I don't know if this was maybe translated on the TV, but the atmosphere was really, really nervous in that second half. And I remember there was a moment about halfway through the second period where every misplaced pass was getting sort of jeered and groaned at. And there was just this real sense of, if Brighton go and snatch a third goal here, they're probably going to go on and win it. And equally, Brighton themselves probably weren't playing very good. And if Newcastle had maybe just got their act together, picked a final ball better, they might have actually been able to capitalise it and go on and win the game. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But I think, again, we saw maybe shades of what we've seen the last couple of weeks. A good first half. They come out in the second half. The game's still there to be won. And unfortunately, they just don't look the same team. They look tired. I thought they looked leggy yesterday in that second half. Extra time will not have done them very good with that Carabao Cup around the corner. So yeah, again, it was a second half that we've probably seen a couple of times already this season. And the flashpoint, of course, that we need to talk about was that Anthony Gordon red card. Now, I'll be very, very surprised, but I'm going to open it to the floor here. And anybody who's watching live, please do let me know. Is there anybody out there that thinks Anthony Gordon should not have been sent off? Because I think the consensus is generally universal. I think everybody is on the same side here. He should have been sent off. I think it was a stupid thing to do. It was petulant. It was petty. It was whatever you want to call it. It was. Let's just take the Carabao Cup final out of it. Even in isolation, to do that with 7 minutes of normal time left in an FA Cup game, which is hanging in the balance and could go either way, it was stupid. It was a really bad decision. But obviously, the lasting consequences that it's going to have for Newcastle is what it means for them further down the road. And it now means that Newcastle United are going to have to go back to the drawing board for the Cup final. And the reason I'm chuckling there is because we're already getting a few comments here in the comment section. We've got Ghost in the Suzuki Grass saying complete head loss. He deserved to be sent off. Simon Long says Stonewall red card. Dino says red card all day. So there's just the early signs of what is to come. Graham says Gordon red card all day. He lashed out. And Darshell says Gordon didn't want to face Liverpool, his team. I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure Anthony Gordon would have given anything to play in that cup final, and unfortunately he isn't going to do that. Really stupid, as we say. For those who haven't seen it, it's probably best that you don't, because it will only annoy you. But obviously, Anthony Gordon has a little bit of a jostle with Van Heck, the Brighton defender, loses his rag a bit. The ball, actually, the game had stopped. The whistle had gone. That, really, it shouldn't have happened because there was nothing to play for. The ball was also heading out of play. Anthony Gordon, as people have said in the comments, loses his cool a little bit and with two hands sort of shoves Van Heck in the head. He gets a little bit unfortunate because I think he's just, again, to maybe give Gordon the benefit of the doubt, he maybe just goes to shove him on the shoulder, in the chest, and the back, but unfortunately he gets his position all wrong in that split second, and unfortunately he shoves Van Heck. There was never going to be anything else than a red card, despite maybe Newcastle players going over and trying to defuse the situation. But unfortunately, that red card is given, and it is going to be a 3-game ban for Anthony Gordon. We asked Eddie Howe after the game, would he appeal it? Now, Newcastle United surely have to appeal this. They would be stupid not to, but it would be very, very surprising to see if it gets overturned. But we've got some Eddie Howe quotes here to read to you. And Eddie says, it looked harsh, but we will have to analyse it properly. We have not seen a replay of it. I'm going on my original view, and I thought it looked harsh. Anthony didn't mean any harm. I have only seen him very briefly coming out to you, and he was very disappointed. I don't think Anthony has gone with any intention to do any harm there. I have to see it properly before giving a big opinion on it. Now, Eddie Howe after the game was probably asked 5 or 6 times in the post-match press conference by us and the local media and the national media to give some sort of answer on Gordon in one way or the other, whether it was, should it have been a red? Have you seen it back? How was he feeling? And Eddie Howe was very, very reluctant to give an answer. He kept insisting that he hasn't seen it again. He kept insisting that he would have to go and watch it before we had given an opinion. We won't get the chance to speak to Eddie Howe about this matter until Friday, but by then Newcastle will probably already know whether their appeal has been successful or not. Again, like I say, I would be very, very, very surprised if that gets overturned. But hey, shy Ben's getting out. If you don't try, you don't get anything. And Newcastle, we expect them to appeal. I don't think it will happen, unfortunately. That obviously had Newcastle at a disadvantage for just a few minutes. Tariq Lamptey gets sent off, Brighton's right back, a couple of minutes later for a second yellow card. And a couple of minutes after that, Newcastle United thought they'd won it. Bruno sends the resulting free kick into the box. Fabian Schär turns it home with a volley. And Newcastle wheel away in celebration, thinking they've stolen it at the death. Unfortunately, VAR and there was semi-automated offside, which, by the way, came into use yesterday. But for me, did they really make the game any quicker? I know they've been used in previous tournaments and they're meant to be more accurate, but I thought we were probably waiting just as long, if not longer, yesterday for those VAR offside answers, despite that new technology coming in. But eventually, after a lengthy review, that gets overturned. It's back to 1-1. We go into extra time. And again, it was just that sort of two very tired teams, no fluency in attack. Newcastle were maybe knocking on the door with a couple of half chances. Jacob Murphy had a chance to gnarly lash one at goal from distance. Dan Burn, with Newcastle 2-1 down in the closing stages, maybe had a chance to do something in the closing stages. But Brighton go up the other end. Danny Welbeck scores again at St James's Park. Tino Livramento, he will not want to watch that replay back because he was playing Danny Welbeck a long way onside. Welbeck's really clever running between target and Burn catches Newcastle out. They stood caught sort of napping, and it's a really good finish by Dubravka. There was also a really, really interesting moment where the game had finished. Pretty much every single player had exited the field, and Danny Welbeck just came off the pitch doing his post-match interview with ITV, and there was a very angry Newcastle fan shouting Mackham at him and essentially telling him to F off, being politely. And Danny Welbeck sort of bit his tongue for a little bit and then tapped his chest and said, "Yeah, I am a Mackham. What are you going to do about it?" Which was maybe a little bit of an unsavoury end of the afternoon for him. What it means, of course, is Newcastle United out of the FA Cup. It means that they are still sort of stuttering their way and spluttering towards the Carabao Cup final in a couple of weeks' time. We know it's not the preparation we wanted. There will again be questions asked as to whether that cup final date and the fact that it's been in the diary for a couple of weeks, has that been a huge distraction for Newcastle? Some will say yes, many will say yes. Eddie Howe has tried to not make that the case, but unfortunately it looks like that is the case. We've got some more comments here as well. Andrew saying, totally agree with your assessment. Thank you, Andrew. Jay from the Tune says Gordon was in the wrong, but he does not deserve the backlash. Now, this is something I want to talk about, and I'm glad somebody's commented this. Now, I've seen a lot of over the top, should we say, reaction to Anthony Gordon. And again, I don't really want to I don't want to offend Anthony Gordon because he has cost Newcastle United no end. They're going to go into that Carabao Cup final and the game at West Ham and the game after that in the Premier League at a real disadvantage here. But some of the reaction to Gordon has been predictably over the top. I've seen fans saying they don't want to see him play for Newcastle United again. I've seen, he's let the club down and should be made to sit out by the end of the season. Now, of course, these are over the top reactions from a select group of fans. But let's remember, okay, there's no conspiracy about him not wanting to play in the cup final against his boyhood club, Liverpool. Anthony Gordon is a Newcastle United player. He will want to be in that cup final. He's a young lad. He's made a mistake. He will learn from it. It's out of character. Let's just try and remember that before we maybe go on social media and hound a player who will be absolutely reeling today, despite the fact he has let his side down. And I'm not trying to defend him, but I think that's a very, very good point that Jay from the Tunes just made there in the comment section. Let's just remember, as we do with that abuse that we usually see aimed at Dan Burn and all these local players, let's just remember that going forward. More comments here. We've got... there was a bit of a 50-50 beforehand, but Gordon has put his hands to his head, talking about the red card. We also have Ian saying it was hands on head. It is not getting overturned. We've got Gary V saying Brighton's game plan was spot on, but the ref get them let them get away with some obvious fouls early on, and he set the tone. Gordon was targeted, and unfortunately he bit. It was a red. It will not be overturned. Kevin agrees. He said it's never getting overturned in a million years. Dean says it's 100% a red. It's just a shame Gordon went to push his body. His head came down and took the push. I agree with that. We've got more here. We've got L Stapleton saying, I don't think Gordon fouled was serious violent conduct, though. His shove is a red card in today's context. A 3-match ban is excessive. I'm sure there'll be some people that agree with that. Someone who's just made a good comment there that I've just read out about the referee. Now, I'm not going to say Anthony Taylor was to blame with for Newcastle getting beat yesterday. I think he also got the 2 red cards decisions right. But, boy, oh boy, again, I'm going to open this up to the floor and I'm going to get your take on this. Is there anybody out there who thought Anthony Taylor had a good game yesterday? Because he was letting so much go. I mean, players getting pulled back in the middle of the pitch, no yellow card, late challenges, heavy challenges not penalised, players throwing and kicking the ball away. I thought Anthony Taylor lost control of that game well before the sending off. And yes, he didn't, ultimately affect the outcome, in my opinion. I'm not saying he did, but I don't think that was a good referee performance at all by Anthony Taylor. He was booed off at half-time by the Brighton fans. He was booed off at full-time by the Newcastle fans. One very, very angry Newcastle fan made his feelings clear above the dugout at half-time and sort of screamed expletives at the referee and his assistants, which, again, we don't want to see. But I'll be very, very surprised if anybody comes out in defence of Anthony Gordon in the comments here. And the first one we've had in was saying Taylor was abject. The standard of refereeing in this country is in the toilet. So then, what does it all mean? What does it mean for Newcastle United? Well, in the short term, obviously, they're out of the FA Cup. As I said at the very top of this show, it was a really, really good opportunity for Newcastle to go far in this competition, purely because of the teams that are not in the hat still. Purely because you look at the likes of Bournemouth and Palace and Villa and Preston, and Fulham even, and say, look, on Newcastle on their day can beat all of these teams. You are probably not going to get a better chance if you're one of those clubs in and around mid-table to go and win the FA Cup this season, because you're probably looking at that list of teams and saying, well, it's only really City and Villa who are going to really, really cause you some major concern. What it also means ahead of this cup final, and I think it's important we talk about the cup final, because Newcastle are really looking tired, I think. They're looking in need of a good rest. They're not looking like a team who is ready to go to Wembley against probably the best team in Europe, the most informed team in Europe, the team that look like they're going to win the Premier League in an absolute canter this season. They do not look like a side full of confidence. Now, after losing 2-0 at Anfield a couple of days ago, in pretty poor fashion without really laying a glove on them, they needed a cup win coupled with a result at West Ham next week to really, boost them going into that final. Now, don't get me wrong. I think even if Newcastle go and lose to West Ham or maybe draw against West Ham, I think there will still be a sense of confidence going into that final, purely because it's a one-off. People will say, look, Newcastle have learned from 2023. They've learned from that Man United defeat. They're in a better position now, maybe you could say, because they've experienced European football. They've added players like Tino and Tonali and Hall to their first team. Eddie Howe came on as a manager. They've maybe figured Liverpool out a little bit from that game. I don't know. I think going into that cup final, there will naturally just be confidence because Newcastle are there, and there will be that general excitement. We've got Darren here in the comments saying the cup final is a one-off. You don't know what's going to happen, and that is true. But this is definitely not the preparation that Eddie Howe wanted for that Wembley game. He will not have wanted Newcastle to be really stuttering their way. I mean, their only real win of note since that semi-final win over Arsenal is the game against Forest, and Eddie Howe came out at the end and said that felt like a defeat. So that pretty much sums up where Newcastle are at the moment in this stage of the season. It puts huge pressure on that game at West Ham next week. That is a tricky game against a team that are playing much better under Graham Potter than they were against Julian Lopetegui, even though they came to St James's Park and beat Newcastle under Lopetegui. Some big question mark as well about the team, maybe. Who are we going to see in that cup final? Has anybody played themselves into contention? I think you would argue that Martin Dubravka might have, but then you would maybe look at someone like Harvey Barnes and say he didn't take his opportunity on Sunday, which is a real shame because there's a player there. He just needs the minutes, he needs the confidence, and when he gets these rare glimpses of some first team minutes, he really needs to take them. But he was brought off in the closing stages of that game yesterday. A real shame for him. Thank you as ever for those who are jumping in the comments and watching along live. Your comments as always are really appreciated. We did send out an email over the weekend and asked fans for their questions, and we've got a few here that I'm going to read out. I'm going to start off with a really, really easy one to answer, and we've already touched on it here, and that is, do you think Gordon's appeal will be overturned? That is came from Gary, and I think, as I've said, I would be very, very surprised if this gets overturned. I was looking earlier today just for a little bit of research as to what red cards have been overturned in the Premier League in the last couple of months. And there's a couple that stand out. Miles Lewis-Skelly got his one against Wolves overturned, which was sort of deemed as a late challenge. It was a stamp on the ankle that was overturned after Michael Oliver gave it. Bruno Fernandes also got one overturned after a late challenge against Spurs. But I think it is more telling to see which ones did not get overturned on appeal. And crucially, Fabian Schär's against Ben Brereton Diaz, when he lightly brushed the Southampton man's head, he went down. That did not get overturned. And John Duran, I mean, I know Newcastle United fans will say his red card at St James's Park was a sending off. Aston Villa fans might say otherwise, but that did not get overturned on appeal. Now, I think we learn more from those not getting overturned than we do than from Bruno Fernandes and Miles Lewis-Skelly's not getting overturned. Those were late challenges. These were sort of off-the-ball incidents, a stamp and a headbutt, if you want to call it that. Obviously, it wasn't a headbutt by Fabian Schär. So I would be very, very surprised if that gets overturned. Just on that, though, Newcastle United have 2 days from the incident happening to appeal. So they've got until tomorrow. We're obviously recording this on Monday. They've got until Tuesday to lodge an appeal. They can lodge it under the category of wrongful dismissal with the FA, with an independent regulatory commission reviewing the incident, and then they will decide whether the referee made an obvious error. Look, I think we'll all agree it would be an absolute miracle if that gets overturned, but you never know, stranger things have happened. So that is the answer to that one. We also had an email sent in saying, do we need to see a change in formation? It feels like we still lack a plan B, but Arsenal proved we look decent with 5 at the back. Now, again, I'm going to throw this out to the floor and those watching along live. What does Eddie Howe need to do? Maybe for the cup final, maybe going forward. Do we maybe go and see 5 at the back for a little bit? Do we maybe need to see a change in personnel? Who needs to come back into this team? Is it Lewis Miley? Are they going to be okay because Joelinton's back in? Has Barnes or Willock done enough to maybe lay down a motto for a start? I don't know. I think, for me personally, to answer this question, I wouldn't be against 5 at the back of the cup final. I think my only issue is, do Newcastle have the players in their squad to do that now? Sven Botman didn't play yesterday, didn't make matchday squad. He is getting better, but he is not he's not 100% fit, and he wasn't 100% confident to play yesterday. And we also saw Lewis Hall miss out of the matchday squad entirely, which is a real shame. Now, we don't know the severity of that ankle injury that he picked up at Liverpool. Eddie Howe was pretty vague on that yesterday, but he did say that he was going to see a specialist. We had Tino at left back. We had Trippier at right back. Does he maybe go with those two as wing backs like we saw like we saw on Sunday, and then go Botman, Burn and Schär at the back for the cup final? Darren Lee says here in the comments, we need Botman back. I think everyone will agree with that. Then what does that mean for the midfield? Bruno's not going to come out the team, but he's not a man in form at the minute. Does that mean Miley drops out and it's Tonali and it's Joelinton as usual? With no Gordon in the cup final, who plays up top alongside Alexander Isak if Isak is fit? He obviously came off yesterday with a little bit of general tiredness, Eddie Howe said. They will have to really wrap him in cotton wool before the cup final. It'd be very, very interesting to see whether he plays at West Ham or whether Eddie Howe maybe decides to give him a little rest. Personally, what I think we're going to see, now I'm nailing my colours to the mast early here. I think if everybody who we think is going to be fit is fit, I don't think we see a change in formation. I think for the cup final, we see Martin Dubravka, Tino Livramento, Dan Burn, Fabian Schär, Lewis Hall as a back 4. I think we see Bruno, Tonali and Joelinton as a midfield 3. And then I think he maybe goes Murphy, Isak, and then one of Willock or Barnes on the left-hand side. It's less messy. It's less to change. You're not faffing about with the system. You're not maybe throwing into players into a position they're not comfortable with. Like I've seen with some suggesting Joelinton should maybe play in the front three rather than the midfield. I don't know. That is maybe my hunch as we sit here less than 2 weeks out from the final. Everything could change by then. We don't know what the fitness status is going to be of the likes of Lewis Hall, Tino Livramento, Sven Botman, Joelinton, Isak. We don't know about Gordon's appeal. There's a lot of moving parts, but I think that's what they probably go with. And we also had a question here. Do we think Howe has realised he may have made a mistake with Pope and Dubravka? Now, there was a really interesting quote that came out from Eddie Howe at the end of the game yesterday, and that was when he was asked about the decision to bring Martin Dubravka back in. And the question went something along the lines of, was that decision made because of it's a cup game, or was that made because it was, this is the team you want to play going forward? And Eddie Howe's response was a short one, and it said the selection was always based on the next game. It was us trying to win that game. Now, I don't know if I'm reading too much into that, but I think that is Eddie Howe saying Martin Dubravka is back in the team. We needed to win a team. I'm playing the team that I thought was going to win, my best team really that I could have played, and that includes Martin Dubravka. What do people think about that? Does Martin Dubravka come back in? Was it a mistake to maybe drop Dubravka out of the team for Forest and Liverpool? We know how shaky Nick Pope has looked because he's not match fit. He's been out of the team for a while. He's had those problems injury-wise with his knee, with his shoulder. Was it a bad decision? I think maybe Howe's looking at that and thinking we might have made a slight error. That it was good to see Dubravka out yesterday. I thought he was really, really good. And it was good to see him back. I think he keeps his team. I think he keeps his place. I hope he keeps his place. It'll be very, very interesting to see if he does or not. Before we go, then, we will just jump into the comments finally and get some last thoughts. We've got loads of comments coming in here. Thank you. We have got Jason saying if Gordon had shoved him anywhere but the head, he wouldn't have been sent off. Darren Lee talking about Liverpool says the cup final is a one-off. We don't know what's coming. Kevin Bell then jumps back in and says, well, Watford said that in 2018 and they got bashed 6-0 by Manchester City. Hopefully that's not the case. Travel Book says, Hobby Barnes, show us why we bought you. A. Gadius goes back to Minteh and says, I respect Minteh not celebrating. He really did seem keen to come here. That was on about Newcastle. David says, I think Dubravka stayed because of a promise of a cup final place after his 2 performances against Arsenal. I think that's a very good point. Omar says, I think that they will reduce his suspension to 2 games. Obviously, talking about Anthony Gordon. That would obviously still mean that he misses the cup final, unfortunately. Simon thinks we should go back to the Arsenal formation for the cup final. Les says, Sven Botman is a huge miss. And Terry says, Howe needs to pray Liverpool have a day off. And I think that's where we end the podcast with a bit of positivity. Newcastle are going into a cup final. Yes, they're on the back of a couple of defeats, a couple of shaky performances. Yes, they need consistency, but on their day, we know they can beat anyone. They've shown it this season by going away to the Premier League big boys and winning. I know they haven't done that against Manchester City under Eddie Howe. I know they haven't gotten anything at Liverpool in about 30 years, but you never know. Have some belief. Hopefully a good win against West Ham next week, and they go into that cup final very, very confident. That's all from us in this episode. We will have more later in the week with myself and John Gibson. We'll also have the view from the opposition, and we'll also have a couple of other episodes thrown in between. Thank you as ever to everyone who has jumped in to the comment section and watched along live. You've helped massively with me getting through this show because we've been able to have a nice bit of back and forth that I would have usually had with Andrew. But thank you very much for joining us as ever, and we will speak to you very, very soon.